But with all the great plans and amazing things which are underway, we're looking for very good times in near future.
Okay, great. We'll come back to you. Anchita, you're a cultural entrepreneur. Yes. You run culture. So
Yes.
tell us quickly about your organization.
So Culture is a creative and cultural startup which basically tries to promote access, understanding, and experience of India's pluralistic culture. And we do this through three things: product, experiences, and content. And primarily we focus on product. What we're trying to do is take complex concepts of culture and make it into fun, experiential products which people can interact with. We also try to gamify content. We're creating an app. We did the India's first Heritage Olympiad. So content also, we're trying to present it in short format and interesting format. Experiences, we've been trying to do workshops, museum walks, heritage walks, and trying to engage more and more people with these activities. We recently started Center for Museums. What we're trying to do is create a pool of experts, which consists of designers, architects, archaeologists, technology experts, communication experts, so that there is a ready directory for museums to come and contact them depending on what their requirements are. Recently, we did the Museum Week, in which we are trying to promote museum professionals, museum-based research. We came out with a museum influencer list to highlight the heroes in the sector. Right. So that's what we've started doing, and we'll speak more about it, I think, in the discussion forward.
Great. Let's move to Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee. He is not the designer. He is the Director General of CSMVS, also known as Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya, Mumbai, formerly known as the Prince of Wales Museum. So tell us a little bit about your museum.
There is a beautiful museum in Mumbai located at Kalagora Art District, popularly known as Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya. But the museum has many names. I think our museum, one of the few museums in the country, named every 50 years. So when it started as Lady Hardinge War Hospital, then Civil Hospital, then Children's Welfare Society, and finally on 10 January 1922, the doors of the museum opened to the public as, Prince of Wales Museum of Western India. In 2001, decolonization, as part of decolonization process, the name was changed as Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya. But this is one of the few institutes in the country supported by the people. This institute is one of the 4 largest cultural institutes in the country, unaided by the government. We don't get any routine financial support from the government. This is a people's museum, by the people, for the people. So when we discuss about the sustainability, I will be very happy to share our model with all of you. Thank you.
Mr. Daniel.
Thank you, Shruti. What I thought I'll do is, I've kind of worked with museums for over 3 decades in over 50 countries. So in my opening comments, I thought I'll quickly flag 6 lessons I've learned very, very quickly. The first one is the approaches might be different for private museums versus public museums. The second lesson is when you design with operating cost in mind. I've seen very often museums spend tons and tons just running it. I've been to museums that spend more than 20% of the operating budget on air conditioning. So design with that in mind. Number 3 is create the structure that would bring in funding. So make sure you look in terms of the supporter. They look at continuation of leadership, a whole range of other things, so keep that in mind. Number 4 is dissect and see all the aspects within your operation that can bring in funding. Of course, everyone knows about tickets and venues and shops. But every time you give a loan, can you monetize that? Can you monetize your skill sets as commercial services? Number 5 is most public institutions in the West are not fully funded. They're funded between 30 to 80%. So keep that in mind also for public institutions. It makes them sharper and makes them more audience focused. And the last one is, it can take 5 to 10 years to get somewhere, so you got to give it time. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Summed it up before we could. But Asad Lalji doesn't need any introduction. He's been quite familiar this morning as well and other days. So please go ahead.
Thank you. I run a public programming platform. It's called Avid Learning. So essentially what we do is we do talks, workshops, masterclasses, festivals in the area of art, culture, heritage, innovation. In online, in COVID, we pivoted online. We did about 240 programs in our first year. We do our programming to scale, and part of what I do is I collaborate with the ecosystem. I work with everybody. I never say no. I've collaborated with Mr. Mukherjee several times, Aditya also. So y'all are next. Culture, we've done some stuff. And part of also what I do in Mumbai, we have an opera house, which is the oldest standing opera house in India, only surviving one actually. It was shut for 25 years and it reopened in 2016. And I was hired as a curator, and me and my team have been running it ever since. And we've been working on it even through lockdown. Now again, pivoting online for an opera house makes no sense because you only survive if there are bums on the seat. But we did come up with an interesting program during the COVID times. And we'll come to the financial sustainability of that a little later. But I also am part of various organizations that help looking at the issues of financial sustainability and others at the arts and culture ecosystem. So.
All right. Let's dive right into the elephant in the room, which are high establishment costs. Everyone talks about it, but no one addresses why and how we can actually tackle it, right? So let me start with you. Let's talk about the pandemic itself, right? You were shut for over 300 days, right? You had funding, though, from the Ministry of Culture. They took over, say, 5-6 months, right? So at least you had that covered. How did you manage otherwise?
Well, during pandemic, if you talk of pandemic, first let me tell about the establishment cost that we have. It's around 19 crores a year for managing not only our recurring expenditures, but also developmental costs and the salaries.
So 19 crores are your establishment costs. I hope you can hear it right at the end. But the good news is that you made 25 crores last financial year.
Yeah. No, last financial year we could make 25 crores, which has been the highest ever earned by Science City. And we could make a profit of around 6 crores last financial year. That has been quite a turnaround, I would say. But yes, as you mentioned, pandemic was a tough time. Our receipts went down to around 6 crores in the first year of the pandemic, and it rose to around 10 crores in the next year of pandemic. We had some savings from our previous years, but yes, ministry also came forward to help us at least in giving the salaries to the 68 employees, government employees who run Science Center.
All right. Let me come to you, Mr. Arya. You're not funded at all, except for the help that you've received from the Haryana Municipal Corporation in terms of providing cement and steel, etc. There's been no monetary grants per se, right?
Absolutely none.
Now, you opened just a few months before the pandemic.
6 months before
right?
the first lockdown.
And unfortunately, you had to let go of everyone that you had hired. After lockdown was over, after more or less you opened, you were handed a bill of 55 lakhs.
So, as you know, museums have to look after the humidity levels and many things. I was allowed to go visit the museum and sit there with one guard and run the air conditioners. I did it. I did it for 6 months. And end of the 6 months, I had a fat bill of 55 lakhs. I told the government that I'm going to shut this down. They published it in the newspaper. And yes, a lot of individuals came to donate money because I believe in the power of people. It's a museum which I have created with the help of people. Why a museum is crowd-funded. The government gave me funds for infrastructure. I created the interiors. Content comes from my collection. I curated it. I run it. And I believe my partners are the citizens of Gurugram. They help me run the museum. Today, every week when I get few thousand visitors, I say, yes, we are there.
So you had crowdfunding, which worked for
Absolutely.
you, and that happened quite by accident. In fact, people started approaching you because they saw that article in the paper, right?
Yes, one gentleman came and he said, my company is going to speak to you. And within 3 months, they installed a 60 kilowatt solar power plant on a roof, which takes care of 30% of my electricity expenses.
So that's interesting. That's an interesting model to watch out for in future, also for many museums that are here. That and is that solar?
Absolutely, it's solar. So, you know, I just have to look after, make sure the panels are clean, which I do every week.
And has that affected your electricity bill?
Oh, it
Obviously?
has. So, yeah, there is a substantial drop in my electricity bills.
Okay, excellent. We'll come back to you again. Priyanka, you are fully funded. So during the pandemic, all your expenses were taken care of by the government. Right now, whatever you get, 10 to 15% is from your ticket sales and from
Sale of merchandise and renting out our spaces.
Right. So I want to ask you a little bit about how autonomous are you really in thinking and behaving like an entrepreneur?
Okay, so while, autonomy and freedom is one of the most desired aspects of being in this space, which is a blend of creativity and real-time practical insights into how will you really run the place. At the end of the day, we do not have a problem going by the books. We are a Government of India institution. We're constantly being watched. We constantly have to be very responsible and answerable to people. So that is the price, that we pay, that sometimes probably government institutions could say that we lack autonomy or freedom. But with us, things are, of course, changing because now we are under a corporation, like I mentioned. And there has been immense amount of encouragement for public and private partnerships to enhance tourism, to mitigate our costs, to get the right expertise. And cinema is really like a very holistic and complete form of art. So there is a role for all kinds of people, in it. So it's a very fine line between how free we are and how responsible we are. But going forward, I think we do not have much to complain. Like I said, under NFTC, we're looking at venturing out and doing a lot of new things, taking new initiatives. So I think we're in a comfortable space right now.
Mr. Mukherjee, I'd like to come to you. Do you have a mic there? No? All right. Okay. So, Mr. Mukherjee, let me ask you, except for the 50,000 rupees that you get from the BMC, right? There is no grant. There are no grants coming in, right? How did you manage? You have such a huge campus. Your establishment costs must be through the roof. So how did you manage?
That's a good question, and particularly during pandemic, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare for us. Government institutes, they did not realize so much because they got the government support, government patronage. In our case, it was really painful. 300 staff. We have 300 staff, and we decided not to terminate a single staff. That's a part of our policy, institutional policy. But what was important at that particular point of time, communication and compassion. So every day we used to communicate with the staff and the management that this is the situation, we have no earning, and reducing our establishment administrative cost as per as possible. And then we projected, budget, particularly the salary component. And then the solution was that staff voluntarily they contribute. So we had a meeting, online meeting, where senior officers, this is very rare, in our country, where senior officers voluntarily contributed 35% of their salary for 18 months. And then the middle level staff, they decided to contribute 25%. And when our ground level staff, because we exempted them, we thought, we will not involve. But the moment they got to know, they said, we are also a part of CSMBS family. We need to contribute. Then we decided above 20,000, and they contributed 10%. And that actually helped. And then we realized that in spite of all our internal efforts, it's really difficult to manage the institute, and a kind of thought that culture belongs to whom? Culture belongs to community. Culture is a part of our life. So community has a responsibility. So we thought, why not we involve communities? So we came up with an idea, adopt a museum object, adopt a gallery. So we identified 100 objects in 3 categories, treasure, masterpieces, and antiquity. And quickly calculated, maintenance cost of one treasure category object for 2 years. We anticipated that this disease will stay for 2 years. So 5 lakhs for treasure category, 2 lakhs for masterpieces, and 50,000 for antiquity. There was a lot of anxiety, to be honest with you, whether in 2020, hardly you could see anybody. And people, they were nervous, there was a complete chaos all around us. But the response from community, unbelievable. In that particular year, we could raise about 4 crores. 4 crores. And today, that scheme is still on. Altogether, 9 crores we raised under this scheme. And that saved the museum.
And also your gallery was adopted, right, by a particular family.
Today, today you enter, that is what I'm saying, that public participation. Public participation in public museum, people's museum. So our, as you enter, everything, the garden, the solar, like you, everything, on solar. We have got the platinum award for the green museum concept. We use rainwater harvesting. Everything sponsored, everything supported. The road also, constructed by some corporate. The building maintained and conserved by TCS. Each gallery is adopted by corporate or individual. And then you enter into the gallery and you see objects, and then you see the label, this particular object adopted in memory of so and so.
Right.
So this is truly, public participation.
And I think you were apprehensive at first, whether the public would really reciprocate. But they did. They came forward. And similarly with Camera Museo, right? Asad, would you like to add to that?
So I come from a little different perspective. Both what I do is private, technically Avid is a part of a corporate group, but I'm responsible for raising part of my operating costs, not my salaries, for me and my team, and we don't have a very large team, it's about 10 people. So we were fine, we all, senior management obviously, it is what it is. We do some programs which we charge very little, but generally we don't make any money. We pay people out of that. So that obviously was going on as is. The Opera House model, which is the one we were discussing earlier, I think, single screen theaters always finds it difficult to be self-sufficient. Now, Opera House is privately funded, privately run. It's under the patronage of the royal family of Gondal. And we were doing very well before lockdown. I mean, we were actually paying our electric bills and our outgoings. That was the only, you couldn't afford to make a lot of money because, if you invite in talent, you have to pay them. And we believe in paying everybody. But when lockdown happened, we were shut for 2 years, and by the government regulations, that, and even when we opened, it was 50% occupancy. So immediately you can't even rent out the place for the amount you did, because they can't bring in the amount of people they would want to. They have to bring in half. So it was very difficult, and I think that residual effect is, we're still feeling it. Everyone says we bounce back and all, but everyone's still recovering from that. Yeah, it's looking very optimistic. People are out in large numbers. Shows are going house full. But there was a lot of cost, because what happens is when a venue, Aditya just mentioned, Mr. Mukherjee, is shut, the costs don't shut. I mean, you still have to maintain, and especially when you're looking at heritage old buildings, they need a lot of money to maintain and, keep the costs going. And then you have all these wonderful taxes which come. You're not doing business, doesn't make a difference. You still have to pay a property tax. So that said, it's under the patronage of the royal family, so it's fine, but we don't take money from anyone else. And I raise my programming money through collaborations and partnerships. I work a lot in what I call cultural diplomacy, working with consulates. So you bring something and we pool in our resources and make things happen, essentially.
So we are going to look at corporate funding, but I just want to go to you, Mr. Daniel. Give us an international perspective on how other museums are handling this around the world.
Sure. Well, maybe just to build on what I said in my opening comments, I think there are many approaches. See, one of the prime things that they do is the whole issue on audience engagement. Make sure what you do gets more and more attractive, because then more people come, the gate takings go up, yes, but it's still a very small percentage to fill your coffers. So that's one thing. So instead of getting 500,000 visitors, if you can get 600,000, that's a good start. Mm-hmm. But to do that, you need to make the audience engagement part quite interesting. The second bit is, you look at the services that you have, what are aspects that could be commercialized? I know lots of loans go out of Indian museums. Are you charging a loan fee for that? Right? You have certain skill sets among your staff. Are you commercializing that? So if you can do that, because I know in one of the museums I worked for a long time, that brought in nearly 8% of the budget. The third thing is external sponsors make that quite interesting for them to donate. How do you provide that space? It's a bit hard when an organization is 100% under the government. I think you need to have a little more autonomy and other things to receive it. But in many institutions, it could bring in close to 15-20% of the budget. Typically, in many of these institutions, the government contribution is only between 30 to 80%. Right. So the rest needs to come in more innovative ways. So these were, and the last one is, make sure your operation is more sustainable. I think a lot of people have mentioned about solar and other things. Air conditioning. I've been to a museum in Malaysia where 25% of the operating budget was spent on air conditioning, and it's not sustainable. Thank you.
So I was reading somewhere, some museums opted for NFTs. Some museums are actually consulting private collectors and smaller museums and making money. So that was the way to become financially sustainable for these museums. Do you see that being replicated in Indian museums?
See, even globally, museums, I was in the board of the International Council of Museums. By definition, you got to be non-profit. So you cannot, buy and sell art. You can't work with private collectors. It's a no-no. With NFT, it's a debate that still is happening. So even if you want to sell a digital equivalent, can you or can't you? Because the current code of ethics, there'll be a little bit of debate. So my view is, you got to wait for a year or two for all this to settle down before you can actually dabble in that realm. So at this point, it's not that easy, but with time, again, there's no other option. But they're, of course, looking at the online presence increasing. One of the museums I worked with had 500,000 through the gate, 20 million through the web. 20 million is a large number. How do you even get $1 from each of them? That's a phenomenal sum. So NFTs, of course, is one, but there are so many other options.
Mm-hmm. Anchita, let me come to you. Since you run a consultancy, you advise others, how receptive are museums, first of all? And what, according to you, would be the top 5 examples that you can give us that museums can actually take on and become financially sustainable?
Right. I think it depends from museum to museum because obviously there can't be top 5
No,
solutions
but first
for
of all,
each.
are they receptive enough?
Honestly, as an outsider, someone who wants to work in the culture sector and as a cultural entrepreneur, it is very difficult to sort of reach out to museums and work with them. We can only create prototypes, but we need the buy-in from the museums to for copyright issues, licenses,
Yeah.
and of course, to access their collection, whether it is what they've displayed or what they've not displayed. So it's a challenge for sure, but this is a start, Museum Expo, where we got to see conservation techniques. So we need more and more such initiatives where startups, cultural entrepreneurs can come, display what they're capable of doing. In fact, what I wanted to also propose was museums as cultural incubators. So my startup is currently incubated at IIT Kanpur as well as IIM Lucknow. Now, what happens is that we are surrounded by tech startups or health startups. The kind of mentorship that is sort of given to us is very focused on what startup ecosystem has been, ROI based or 10x returns and things like that. But we need incubators who understand the sector, understand the pace at which we can grow, understand that the kind of mentorship and access that we need is not the same. Even investors, it's very difficult to make investors understand what we're trying to do because the approach is that culture is something funded by government. But cultural entrepreneurship has to be given the support that it needs. For example, we create products. Now the product prototype was created with a design grant from Ministry of MSME. Why can't we sort of bring National Culture Fund, connect them to museums, make collections open for startups to come and give their ideas? So that is, I think, an approach, a mindset and an approach that needs to change.
Mindset change. We're talking about a mindset change. But
Yes.
here I'm asking you about, because you advise cultural spaces and museums on how to also become financially sustainable, what would be, of course, one size does not fit all, but what would be your top 3, top 5, perhaps?
I think one thing we haven't really explored is memberships. I think only a few museums have started offering exclusive membership, benefits. So, for example, if you can have digital collection, which is only accessible, access to old collections, subscription boxes. That's a really interesting model which some museums follow, where monthly boxes of replicas, education material, exhibition material is sent to people. Now, membership is something which can be done digitally as well as physically. So you open up the space first to members only. You can give access, you can give discounts on online stores. So membership making the community feel like they own the museum. They become a part of the museum. Sometimes, you can even make it fun. Vote in an exhibition or vote out an exhibition, So these are some ways in which you can continuously engage with the community and your members. Second, I think, is, of course, licensing. You get your product, you give it for educational purposes. If you think you cannot sort of give it for license it because of copyrights and things like that, educational purposes is something that you can explore. You yourself become education institutions. If you don't have the capability, outsource it. This might be something that museology students might access, and they would pay for it, of course. So that is one. Second is, I think, third is, I think, collaborations. And while museums collaborate amongst themselves, why can't we think about collaborating with sectors outside? Creative industry itself. Yesterday I read about a very interesting collaboration where Museum of Scotland collaborated with the reality show Glow Up and created museum makeup looks. It was interesting for both parties because the reality show winner created museum makeup looks, which obviously helped them, do an interesting thing themselves. And the museum also did a lot of outreach with that. So you have to think in a different manner to now start engaging with people who are obviously not the same as before.
Absolutely. Your audiences have changed. Audiences are younger, so you have to evolve as a museum, right? Let's talk about corporate sponsorships, right? Let me come to you, Asad, first of all. He's got 14 years of experience in Madison Avenue as an ad professional. So you are looking at the big idea, you have looked at it. What are we not doing right, or what can we do better as museums to attract more corporate sponsors?
I mean, you've got stalwarts sitting here who've done so well. But see, I look at the arts and culture as a different way. I mean, I fell into the arts and culture. I have no training. I have no academic qualifications. I was a madman, and I fell into the arts and culture. And I look at, a company, if you look at a corporate, has two sides. They have CSR, and they have their brand. Now, the moment you start taking your CSR money and putting it into arts and culture, you get your hand slapped, because India has a lot more bigger issues which deserve the funding. So my whole thought, and in fact, when I took a continuing ed program called AVID, and I created the cultural arm of the SR group. I've created it as a platform. It is cultural philanthropy. It sits in between CSR and brand. So if companies, I just feel, instead of broadcasting, you narrowcast, because you reach a certain stakeholder that you're trying to reach. Because you can't be everything to everyone. If what your brand stands for, and you start putting in money, and the amount you put in and the ROI you get is exponential. If you really look at, what you get by sponsoring something. But when you create something of your own in collaboration, you create these IPs, and IPs are built with regular, with repeat. You can't just do it 1 year and say, okay, next year we'll try dance, and then we'll try music. You take a category, take a project, take something that you believe in and own it. And it gives you immense value back. I think corporates are stepping up the game. Everyone's looking for interesting things. But I feel just sometimes the gatekeepers are the problem. And education, you have to educate the benefits. And, once you do, and it's also people on the top who believe in it. So I just feel it's a combination of that. And it's changing slowly. And the market 10 years ago and now is totally different. I mean, media is different. The landscape is totally different.
Absolutely. Mr. Mukherjee. So a lot of small museums also say that they're not able to attract the kind of corporate sponsors that you do. I mean, what is it that really gets them to you? You had a building that you wanted to renovate, and you got TCS to do that, right? Take over, I think, 25 crores. So what is it? Could it only be legacy? Is there something more that they're looking at, ROI, that Asad talks about?
It's more than the legacy, your image, your good work, the creativity, innovation, uniqueness you bring in all your projects. And that is something, I realized when we started approaching corporates, approaching our donors. They are not fools. They check your background. They always look at the leader. They look at your activities. So sustainable leadership is also important for sustainable institute. And once you create good image, transparency in your system, so no one, questioning your financial this thing.
Transparency.
That's so important for any institute. If you are unable to create your transparent image in society, people will go away from you. But the moment you create transparent image and bring uniqueness in all your projects, and what is the purpose of an institution? When you create an institution, there is a purpose, and the purpose is education. And you need to invest more on education, on objective. But unfortunately, in most of the institutes, they spend more on establishment and administration and very less on education.
That's right. Just to talk about the figures here, museums spend up to 80 to 90% on establishment costs and sometimes up to 5 to 10% on education, right? That needs to change. You are headed towards 65-35, right?
You see,
35% towards education.
I may be wrong. There are other professionals. They will be in position to tell you the figure. If I'm not wrong, most of the institutes, because I'm in the domain for 32 years, I know, they spend 90% on establishment and administration, and hardly 8 to 10%, sometimes less than 5% on objective. So when I took charge in 2007, I was surprised. Oh my God, my institute spending 90% on establishment and hardly any percent on objective. So that was the challenge before us, that how we spend more on objective and cut down, establishment and administrative cost. And today, after, lot of, initiative and strategies, we are perhaps the institute in the country spending 35% on objective, 35%, and I say it in public forum, and 65% on establishment and administration.
That does deserve an applause, doesn't it? Well, let's have quick thoughts on corporate sponsorships. I know, Mr. Kumar, Science City attracts a few PSUs, and you've started receiving CSR money, but what about corporate funding?
Yes, it's working. Yeah, as far as corporate funding is concerned, it's not only the size specific or the legacy specific, it's also city specific. And unfortunately, Kolkata is not as rich as Mumbai. So getting corporate funding is a little challenging for us. But yes, instead of corporate funding, getting PPPs, especially when you have visitors like what you have in Science City, is a prospect on which we are working. We are working with the corporates where we are, looking for a PPP model, and hopefully we'll be having breakthroughs soon.
Mm-hmm. Already. Any thoughts on corporate sponsorship?
It's very interesting, this whole question about sustainability and sponsorship. So I want to ask people, is museum a business? It is not a business. It is something which is driven from passion. I mean, it has to be driven by passionate people and how they connect. When people walk in, I ask them what can they do for the museum, and I'm able to connect with many CEOs and company heads, and I say, would you like to donate to the museum? They say, oh, can we do a program here? We'll be happy to donate. And I said, here, there is a wall at the entrance, put your name there, and let's do something at the museum. Because to me, it's about sustainability, it's not about making money. And it's a PPP, which is a very unique. Ours is the most unique PPP in this country, where the government put in land and some seed money, and we run it independently. So I bring in as and when I feel like, when people walk in, bring in something, and let's do something.
So financial sustainability has to have an element of passion, like you said, because museums are about that.
Yes, and
right?
very interesting, because when these interns walk in, I said, museology students, is there any course which says sustainability and museums? No, we were never taught that.
Right. Mr. Daniel had something to say, right? Go ahead.
No, I think just even listening to everyone here and based on my experience, I think one key aspect that would be attractive for people to donate is leadership. That includes passion and everything, but also generating revenue takes time. So when you have leadership changes every 6 months or a year, it's very hard. So I think you've got to keep that in mind. Usually you need 3, 4, 5 years or even more. So I think that needs to be kept in mind that it's going to take time. The second is the skill sets. So museums have fantastic aspects in terms of services. How you package it and how you put that across, right? And how you actually then work with them. It will take a few years and then you bring it. Eventually your idea is you're not making profits. You're basically making sure you're doing something good so that more audiences can really enjoy. So I think those are the two aspects I would like.
So leadership, critical,
Yeah.
and services
Yeah.
that needs to be also packaged in a certain way that look attractive to the new consumer.
Yeah,
Right.
and time. So I think it's not going to happen in 6 months. It'll be years.
So
You
patience.
just need to put, yeah.
That's right. Mr. Mukherjee, you wanted to say something?
Just to respond to Mr. Aryan, beauty cannot be enjoyed without money. Money is important, that is something I understand. And what he said, Daniel, the packaging, how you package in today's world, that is so important. Enlightening people that this is important. For many years, for some reason, culture was never ever equated with other sectors. Culture was always ignored, even in our budgetary allocation. Allow me to be a little critical. Even in our budgetary allocation, you have to see with the magnifying glass the allocation for culture. So that is the status of culture, though country is blessed with cultural heritage. So how we enlighten people that this is, part of your life, integral part of your life, and you have a responsibility. So most of the corporates, from my experience, when I talk to them, then they realize that, oh, this is important. So we have to really work hard to enlighten them, but there is a huge cultural hunger. There is a cultural hunger in our country. And they are willing to support, and we have to take advantage. And CSR is helping us. CSR is something, people can think about.
Okay, we are going to quickly give this to Asad 1 moment. Yes.
So, since on the topic of the financial stability, yesterday there was a gentleman from the Transport Museum, and he also spoke, and it really resonated with what we do. There are other ways we make money. It may not be the best way, like, we do shoots for TV or ad films. And everybody says, oh, it's an opera house. How can you do it without for shoots? It let me do 4 other programs I can afford to do if I do 1 shoot. We give it out for weddings. That's fine. Get married there if you want to. Not weddings, but they do their wedding sangeets. All the purists say, oh, how can you do that? But that's giving me the money to do what I want to do. So there are alternate sources of revenue, and obviously F&B is the best. F&B with the liquids always helps in generating the revenue, and that is the revenue earner. Whether you like it or not, you open a restaurant with more refreshments in a government setup. I don't know if I can say all that. And that's how you're going to that gives you the liquidity to do what you want. And regarding convincing corporates, I think corporates are getting more and more intelligent as we are, and the best practices they're picking up also from the West. I mean, you're the kind of companies that are supporting. These are like, banks, private banking. They've supported the operas and at the Lincoln Center and all for years. So they see the brand association with the mindset of the customers that they are attracting. But now it was raised that our audiences are growing younger, and we have to start looking at those younger audiences and activating them. And that's where the whole NFT and AI space is very important.
So keeping the spirit alive.
Right? Nice. By the way, we are just waving here. It's not that we are terribly hot. There are a lot of mosquitoes here. So
Yes.
we are not feeling hot out here, just for the record.
There are a lot of mosquitoes here. Yes, very quickly, and
So
it's
I'll
time
just-
to wind up. So
I'll just make a very
yeah.
quick point here. Usually what happens in our country, everything that's done by the government or everything which is to do with culture, everything to do with the spaces of museums, people expect the prices to be lowest possible. And why is that the case? I have not been able to fathom. I think people are mature, people are ready. Like Mr. Mukherjee is saying, there is hunger for experiences, there is hunger for culture, there is hunger for knowledge. What stops us from putting an appropriate price for that experience? And this is, you know, even though I work with a government organization, it is my perpetual request with authorities that let's create products and experiences beyond what we already house within those walls and let people pay for it. I am adding value to their lives. So this whole concept of everything has to be subsidized, lowest prices, we battled with a price point of 20 rupees a ticket from the inception till a couple of months back. And the museum was free for students of all age groups. People doing executive MBAs also walked in for free. So it was a challenge. But thankfully, we've been able to revise the prices and people are willing to pay. And we had people coming in and saying, "Arey, आप इतने कम पैसे क्यों लेते हैं? आपने इतना अच्छा म्यूजियम बनाया है, इतना सारा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर लगाया है, मुझे तो मज़ा आ गया." 3 घंटे की फिल्म के लिए हम रिक्लाइनर के लिए 1000 रुपये देते हैं, बट हम 3 घंटे के म्यूजियम एक्सपीरियंस के लिए 100 रुपये देने में भी सोचते हैं. I think that thought process has to change from both the ends. That is where that saying that we will never make enough money out of ticket sales is just going to go out of the window. We will make good enough money out of ticket sales. And like, she was mentioning, it is really about packaging your experiences, creating curated content, time on, day by day, and letting people experience it and charging a price at it. Nothing stops us from that. We don't have to stop at what we already have within those 4 walls.
I think the Ministry of Culture is working in that direction so that all museums start behaving like entrepreneurs, right? Instead of being ashamed almost, embarrassed to charge, right? Yeah. Quickly.
Just very quickly, I think it's also let's not blame the museums and this side. Look at the customers. Now we go abroad, we'll pay $300 to see a Broadway show. If I charge $300 or even $150 equivalent, how many people are going to come? They call, if I send my mailer out, they say, "Mere liye 3 ticket chhodna, huh?" I mean, literally, and even the museums, we pay so much abroad when we go. Will we pay an equivalent amount to get that quality? Because we do have it. Mm-hmm. But that's the difference. You'll pay it outside, but you won't pay it here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes.
No, I mean, I think all over the world, because, culture, museums, there's a bit of a public component. Many times it's even free, right? But they do charge for certain exhibitions and other bits. So I think there are ways to do it where you make sure somebody is not disadvantaged, but if they want to do certain things or see certain things, then they pay. But also they themselves would then speak, if this many people come, you know that you have a good product. So I think it's a mix between both.
So differential pricing. I must ask everyone for their last words on what the future of our museums look like to make them financially sustainable, right? Let's start with you. Do we have a mic here?
Well, no matter what you do, ultimately the visitor is the customer which is going to make you financially sustainable. Well, in case of Science City, around 70% of our revenue comes from the visitors' ticket sale, although our ticket prices are quite low. But still, the 70% of revenue we come from, it comes from the ticket sale. So we have to keep, working hard to bring repeat visitors by adding something new all the time. So that is very important if you look for the future. And also we need to look for alternate sources of revenue, and F&B is definitely one of the good ways without liquid income and sector. So F&B, yes, and we have convention center, we have around 20% of revenue we earn from convention center. So you need to look for alternate source of revenues, whether it is from PPP or from CSR or from any other source. But ultimately, it is the visitor which will help you sustain.
Mr. Arya, what is the future of museums?
So I quite firmly endorse his views. My money comes from visitors, experiences at many levels. I have free experience, I have a paid experience, I have an extra experience for which you got to pay extra, and corporate sponsorship. Every 15 days, there's a new art show. I try and find somebody who will pay for the opening, a wine party, and can take the branding. But corporate sponsorship for me is very important. F&B is very important. People queue up outside my museum on the weekend. I know my money is going to come. People want to go around, see the exhibitions, museum, and 600 people are going to queue up for meal outside, which is very high-end.
Priyanka?
I think I'd like to quickly sum up by, saying that while at NMIC, we're trying to do the basics right because we're still very new. We are the baby among the museums, right? But the future for us being a Government of India institution might not essentially be attracting funds, really cash from the corporates, but a barter of expertise and knowledge and collaborating on content and not stopping us to other PSUs and other government institutions, but venturing out to the wider world. I think that's the future. And we are in a genre which is cinema, which is so eclectic, so futuristic. I do not have the luxury of sitting where I am sitting today. So for me, collaborating on content is extremely essential. And in terms of doing the basics right, like you mentioned, a nice cafe. I love Fig at his museum. F&B, partnering, giving out your space for these kind of experiences, merchandise, curated exhibitions, and we're also blessed with a fantastic infrastructure which we have already started to rent out to commercial entities, and the right content, cultural content, and the content that resonates with my museum. That gets us revenue. So if I keep going this way, we're looking at actually making somewhere around, right now I'm at what, 10%? We're only able to recover around 10% of our unique annual expenses. Like I said, the expenses of establishment and manpower are shared with the corporation. We all sit out of one campus. But if we go like this, I think we should be able to reach a figure of a fraction of approximately 50% in next 2.5 years. That's the kind of plan that we have. That's the kind of infrastructure that we have. So that's actually future for me. And digital, of course, like you're saying, NFTs. I cannot take the museum out and just say I do not want people to come to my museum, like sir was mentioning. I want people to come to my museum and experience what we have created in those huge buildings. But a museum on wheels, digital, walkthrough. All these are actually experiential, futuristic things which are pretty much we need to do to give people a sneak peek and then get them on. So digital.
So very quickly now, I've been asked to wind up, so make it brief.
So I heard the word brand association. I think the future is leveraging brand association and reimagining collaborations. Even when we were talking about corporate sponsorships, CSR and funding directly is, of course, there. But why don't we also associate with different corporates for their technical expertise, whether it's tech knowledge, whether it's their marketing knowledge, sometimes financial management. They have the resources, they have the experts that museums probably can't hire themselves. So you can accept sponsorship in different formats. So reimagining collaborations is also something that we have.
Very interesting, reimagining collaborations. Mr. Mukherjee.
Museums need to be creative and innovative to remain relevant in contemporary society. And I strongly believe Indian audience quite matured. They don't mind paying more for quality. Thank you.
Mr. Daniel.
Just very quickly, I think European museums, Western museums over decades have come to this particular level. Singapore over 20 years did it. China over the last decade, every year they were doing 150 to 200 museums. But I'm not sure that's sustainable because it's totally funded by the government. I think that the museum decade for India is coming. It can't be 100% funded by the government. So they need to look at alternate methods. And I think all the things we discussed before would come to play.
I have 2 points. Museums should be tech forward, which includes your NFT, involving technology in the way it's supposed to enhance museum going experiences, whether it's online or offline or digital, whichever you want to call it. And museums need to be inclusive. You have to also take in together the ecosystem and your environment. Not be elitist. Languages, everything's not supposed to be English. Looking at your audiences and your community around you. So once you're inclusive and tech forward, that's what I think is.
So I hope you've taken away some very, very interesting lessons from all our panelists. We've had some very interesting examples of museums that have actually become financially sustainable. The question is, will they manage to remain sustainable in the long term? That's the big question. And we've discussed various ways. One is handling the huge establishment costs, being open, being tech forward, and a lot of other things that we've discussed, but basically keeping the passion alive. So thank you very much, all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for conducting this and moderating this session so lively. I will request my team members to present a memento to all the panelists and moderator of this session, please. And we are grateful to Mr. Anurag Kumarji, Director, Science City, Kolkata, Aditya Aryaji, founder of Camera Museum, Gurugram, Ms. Priyanka Sharma, Manager, Marketing and Administration, National Museum of Indian Cinema, and Ms. Ancheta Nair, Director and Chief Operating Officer, Culture, Shri Sabyasachi Mukherjee, Director, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya, Mr. Vinod Daniel, CEO, in Heritage and CEO, India Vision Institute, and Asad Lalji, SR Group, CEO, Avid Learning, and Shruti Verma, founder, zenbrain.com, for moderating the session. Thank you very much, sir. And honorable panelists, we are grateful to you for participating in this session, which has focused so widely on financial sustainability of museums. Now we will proceed further, ladies and gentlemen, and we have a master class as a new session, next upcoming session. In this 3 days International Museum Expo 2023, we had arranged 7 master classes by global experts on various topics, running from setting up of a museum to capacity building of museum professionals in a scientific way, in accordance with the latest state-of-the-art technologies and international benchmarks and standards. Now it's time to be part of and witness our last master class out of 7. And this master class is about scientific storage by Mr. Tim Reeve. Mr. Tim Reeve is a Deputy Director and Chief Operating Officer of the Victoria and Albert Museum, London, United Kingdom. This Victoria and Albert Museum is world's leading museum of art, design and performance since 2013. It's a proud privilege for all of us to have here Mr. Tim Reeve, who is going to take this master class and will be sharing his experience, his knowledge with us about the scientific storage. Let's welcome with a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Mr. Tim Reeve on the stage for this master class.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would just like to start by thanking the Ministry of Culture for the great honour and privilege of inviting me to take part in the museum conference here in Delhi and to speak on behalf of the V&A. Actually not about science and storage, but really about a new design approach to making collections more accessible. So thank you for this huge honour. But first, I would like to just introduce you all to the V&A. as part of the Exhibition Road Cultural Group Quarter, which you see on the screen behind me, where it has had its home for the majority of its 170 years, alongside the Natural History Museum, Science Museum, the Royal Albert Hall, and a number of other world-class institutions in what we call Albertopolis in South Kensington. But rather than me explain it, I would just like to show this short film, which really encapsulates what the V&A tries to do today. So this film really looked at South Kensington, but what I really want to talk about today is V&A East Storehouse, because the V&A is about to go through a period of very rapid expansion. And I have some images here which show how the V&A family of museums is coming to life, from V&A Dundee, which opened in Scotland in 2017, the Wedgwood Collection, which we look after in Stoke-on-Trent, Young V&A, which we're about to open in Bethnal Green, and then V&A East Storehouse and Museum. And as we expand, we are also stretching our brand and working out how to engage what the V&A does with an ever-expanding audience. So we are, as our physical footprint expands, so our audience, we hope, will grow and crucially diversify, and our brand will need to adapt. So from a world of creativity at South Kensington, to sparking creativity at Young V&A, to Scotland's Museum of Design, or Design Museum in Dundee, firing creativity at Wedgwood, and then at V&A East, creativity for change, creativity that reflects changing outlooks, opportunities, and culture. And so today I want to focus on V&A East, which is developing as I speak in the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in East London, built for the Olympic Games in 2012, and comprising some of the world-class institutions that we have in the UK. London College of Fashion will be alongside the V&A East Museum, BBC Studio, Sadler's Wells, and a new campus for UCL East. So for us, the museum on the bottom, on the left-hand side, and then the storehouse at the Here East Tech Campus, the former broadcast centre for Olympics on the right. And actually, just very recently, we learned that also the David Bowie archive will come to East London as part of the storehouse and museum. So the story of this project really starts in West London, not East London. This is Blythe House in West London. This is where the British Museum, Science Museum, and V&A store their reserve collections, their non-display collections. And of course, as you can tell from this photograph, this is a building that was designed to keep people out and not to let people in. It was designed as the post office savings bank. But for the last 50 years, since the 1970s, has, as I say, been a storage facility. And for the V&A, these are the collections that we housed there, we have something like 250,000 objects, 1,000 archives, 350,000 library books, all stored at Blythe House with very limited access. This gives you a sense of what that collection is made up of, and obviously the largest part of it is textiles and fashion and our theatre and performance collections, but we have collections from across every single medium, every single field of applied arts. And this is how it breaks down in terms of the space it takes up. Something like 15,000 square meters of storage, a similar amount used by the British Museum and Science Museum, the lion's share of that taken up by furniture, theatre and performance, and textiles and fashion. And while we've been at Blythe House for those kind of decades, we have tried to fight against the building, to try and make this building more accessible to the public. And this is the biggest expression of that. It's called the Clothworkers Centre for the Study of Textiles and Fashion, which we opened at Blythe House in 2013. And the idea was to develop facilities within that kind of fortress-like building, which allow greater access to the collections and allow those collections to be used by creatives and practitioners to inspire their work of today. But just as we opened, literally within a month of opening the Clothworkers Centre, the government, the Department of Culture in the UK announced that Blythe House was to be sold for redevelopment, and that each of the 3 museums that house their collection there would need to leave. And this happened just at the same time as the Mayor of London in 2013, that was Boris Johnson, approached the V&A to ask if we would like to be a founding member of East Bank, of this big new culture and education district in the Olympic Park. And this is just some of the dates from the last 10 years which talk to the evolution of this project. So 2014-15 was when we formalised our participation in East Bank, when the funding package was agreed and when an international design competition was launched by the London Legacy Development Corporation for East Bank. In 2015, the winning team was announced. That was Allies and Morrison and O'Donnell and Toomey from Dublin, who were the winning master plan concept for that suite of buildings I talked about at the beginning with Sadler's Wells and London College of Fashion. Then at the end of 2015, it was confirmed finally by George Osborne that Blythe House was to be sold, but that funding support would be given to each museum to find its new home post Blythe House, and each of the 3 museums decided to do something different. And for us at the V&A, we began a search for a London-based location. The British Museum went out to Reading, the Science Museum went out into the countryside to its base in Wiltshire. We were very keen that our collection stayed in London, and so we started to look for a new home. At the same time, the new Mayor of London, so Boris Johnson goes, Sadiq Khan comes in as the new Mayor of London, started to redraw the master plan for the East Bank development. And so we took the opportunity at that stage to redefine the concept for V&A East into 2 interconnected sites on the Queen Elizabeth Park. One based around the storehouse, the other based around the museum. And we reached agreement with the Mayor, with Here East, with LLDC, with the Department of Culture to underpin the business case for V&A East. Then for the storehouse, we ran our own international design competition and appointed Dilys, Scafidio and Renfro to design the V&A East storehouse, and I'm going to share some of their work with you in a second. And then, just as the pandemic hit, we started construction on both of those sites, an approach I cannot recommend to anyone. So, what we ended up with was, through the necessity of moving out of Blythe House and the opportunity to be part of East Bank, this opportunity to revolutionise access to the V&A's collection. And why East Bank? East Bank is already an extraordinary place. So it is part of a very rich creative heritage in East London, both creating and making. This is an international part of London, one of the most diverse parts of London, some of the most deprived boroughs, not just in London, but also around the UK. But some incredible already existing partners there, around Hackney Wick and around Newham. You know, it's a really extraordinarily rich and diverse creative community. And then, of course, the opportunity to work with new partners at East Bank, the ones that I have just listed. And, of course, most importantly of all, a really extraordinary once-in-a-generation opportunity for the V&A to present its collections to new audiences. Some of the youngest audiences in the UK, most diverse, and also with a huge demographic shift from west to east in London, that more people now live east of Tower Bridge than live west of Tower Bridge, and really this is the future, this is where the future of creative London lies. So these then are the two interconnected sites. So in the foreground, the building with Here East written on the top of it, this is the broadcast centre from the Olympic Games, repurposed immediately after the Games finished in 2013 as a tech and innovation campus. This is where the V&A East Storehouse will be located, and then further towards the Olympic Stadium at the back is where the V&A East Museum will sit alongside the rest of our East Bank partners. And we were really determined that if we were going to have to move our entire collection, which you really don't want to do, this is a big, expensive logistical exercise, we were going to move it from one part of London to another part of London. We really wanted to do something very innovative with that collection and make sure we took the opportunity to open it up as never before. So we describe it as revolutionizing access to the world's leading collection of art, design, and performance. And these are the key objectives that we wrote into the design brief for Storehouse. First of all, of course, it needs to fit everything in. It needs to be a very big building. It needs to house our entire collection, our entire reserve or non-display collection with room to spare, with room to grow. We need to take the opportunity to de-silo the collection. We have a collection built around very long-standing institutional departments. We need to take the opportunity to design something that brings those collections and those departments together and promotes collaboration. Also, really crucially for Storehouse, we want this not just to be a place where our collection is stored, but to design a new type of self-guided museum experience from it. So to intertwine through the stored collection opportunities for people 363 days a year, free of charge, any day of the week, to come in and explore the stored collection so that it's not the privilege just of researchers, established practitioners, those with art history degrees and the like. To design in transparency, so the opportunity here to make everything we do as an institution, back of house or front of house, completely transparent, to design it in such a way that you both physically can explore, but visually you can see everything that we do as an institution. And as part of that, of course, to explore new modes of displaying our collection, which are not fixed, which are more flexible, which allow us to be more responsive to what is going on in the world. And we took our inspiration, obviously, from some past projects that the V&A has an involvement with. The most important one for us is obviously the Great Exhibition of 1851, the first World's Fair, where again, huge kind of volumes of space, where artifacts and creative practice from around the world were brought together, and millions and millions of people, a fifth of the UK population at the time, came to just wander amongst the great treasures of the world, the great creative practice of the world. And then closer to home, the kind of gallery projects that we've tried to develop at the V&A, like the ceramics gallery, very, very densely packed object displays to bring as much of our collection onto public display. And then, of course, some of our immersive exhibition displays. This is the North Court from the Alexander McQueen Savage Beauty exhibition, again, to try and take clues from some of our exhibition-making experience as we design that new experience of Storehouse. So, Dilys, Scofidio and Renfro won the competition, and the thing that really won us over were these 6 organising ideas that they brought to that design response. So the first on the left-hand side, unassuming. So we're building Storehouse in what is really a warehouse. It's an industrial building. It's a very high-tech industrial building, but it's a warehouse. We love the fact that it's a warehouse. It's not grand Victorian cathedral-like museum building. It's a blank canvas. It has a kind of neutrality to it. And we love this idea of it being quite an unassuming building when you approach it. It's not a daunting building. It's something that I think will make all visitors, whether they are regular museum goers or not, feel very comfortable, very at home. Optimized, it's an absolutely cavernous space. The idea of using the full height, the full volumes, probably 3 times higher than the exhibition hall we're in now, to make sure that we absolutely optimize that space for our collection. I'll come to excavated last. Inverted, the idea that the public if this really is going to be a new type of museum experience built around the public, that the public needs to be drawn right into the heart of the building. It's no good having the public nibbling around at the edges, waiting till that moment where they come up against a glass screen or a barrier or a security guard. The public need to be the priority and brought right into the heart of it. So public on the inside, and then gradually more and more private as you get to the perimeter. Sublime is the idea, this transparency idea, that what you can't provide physically through design, you can provide these incredible kind of views and these windows into the workings of a 21st century museum. And then finally, the most important architectural move was this idea of excavating that new public space right in the very heart of the warehouse, that conceptually somebody had come in and just carved out an enormous space right in the middle of the storehouse building. And here it is in a sort of axiometric view. So the collection hall, the main public space right in the middle, then all of the racking systems, the adjustable pallet racking, then coming off each of the four sides of the collection hall. And on the left-hand side, a wireframe of what we call the public network. So this is the self-guided route where visitors will be able to, invited in, will be able to find their own way in, a 60 to 90-minute dwell time, and wander around the stored collection, and punctuated by some of the largest objects in the V&A collection that we are not able to display at South Kensington. In this, the volume of the space allows us to punctuate the public network with some of these extraordinary objects. And this section shows how the visitor journey will work from the left-hand side, when they come, bottom left-hand side, when they come into the building, they'll go up this staircase and gradually work their way through the stored collection and up into the main hall. And you can see at every moment they will be surrounded by the collection. They'll be surrounded by a stored collection, but a stored collection somehow curated. So we've inherited 150,000 square feet or 15,000 square meters. We've then built in 2 additional mezzanine floors to make the most of the volume, which is why you see ground floor and then 3 subsequent floors. And these are the competition visuals, which were on the right-hand side, show that excavated public space, that collections hall space, from which the public will be invited to explore one of the large objects on the left-hand side, which is a 15th century marquetry ceiling, the Torios ceiling, which will be literally, as with the other large objects, will be built into the storehouse. Please don't ask to borrow this object. It will be built into the storehouse, and underneath that will be created a new gallery space for displaying 2D material. I'm just going to show you a short clip of the fly-through, the architectural fly-through produced by Diller, Scofidio and Renfro, which shows the kind of entrance to the building and into the collection hall. So this unassuming entrance into that warehouse building, the idea that as soon as you go in through this window, you see the stored collection, welcome spaces leading down to a cafe at the far end, very generous welcome spaces where we hope that audiences will just come and hang out, meet friends, do some homework, work on projects. And then some of the spaces that we don't really have in great supply in South Kensington, and actually are in very short supply across London, creative spaces for wet and dry work, for painting, for sculpture, to get objects out and allow young people to work with them with their hands. And then this is the beginning of the self-guided route, where visitors will be invited up into the storehouse, up this staircase. And then once they go through these 2 doors, they are entering a single climatic condition, a single environment. From this moment on, everything is sharing the same space, everyone, every object sharing the same oxygen, coming up into the collection hall as the main place from which, as you can see, these corridors go off into the rest of the building. So this is the main architecture. This is the way that the storehouse has been conceived and developed and is being constructed. But how do you make sense of this extraordinary collection? You can't just have people wandering amongst just kind of objects that are created and invisible. So we've got here something like 5 times the number of objects we have on display at the South Kensington site. And without introducing display cases, we don't want this to feel like a normal curated museum permanent gallery, but somehow we've got to draw the collection forward for the visitor to make sense of. So we've been exploring different types of new display typology, which make sense of the collection, but also are flexible, allow objects to come and go, because Storehouse, as well as being a museum experience, is a logistics hub for our collection. Objects will come and go all the time, to go overseas, to go into conservation, for other kind of research needs. So we needed something, a display typology that somehow went with the grain of that philosophy, of that concept. And of course, we stumbled very quickly on the humble, ubiquitous, internationally recognized museum crate as the kind of, as the sort of organizing thought for that typology. And it goes right back to any museum's kind of founding moments. It's both on the left-hand side, this is how our objects are moved around, it's how they go on their travels, it's how they go on tour and then come back. In fact, there's an extraordinary craft and expertise which goes into mounting objects, transporting objects. We really wanted to riff off that, the way we display objects at Storehouse. And then on the right-hand side, it's always a really inspiring part of the V&A story for us. The use of these crates through our circulation department in the early years of the V&A to take like a museum and a crate around the country to design schools across the UK to inspire young people and creatives to try and again reawaken some of that philosophy for the Storehouse. So again, through kind of section, we're looking at one of the elevations of the collections hall. You see one of the big, large objects on the left-hand side. That's a fragment of the Robin Hood Gardens housing estate in East London, which is now, most of which has now been demolished. We've rescued this fragment. It was a very important story, not just of East London, but of social housing in the UK. A particular kind of challenge in the UK right now. So we have rescued that fragment. It now hangs off the collection hall. It's the first object that was installed because it was so big and so heavy. It had to go in while we were building it. And then you see right across the elevation there, these crates positioned on the kind of ends of the adjustable pallet racking, giving the opportunity for display. And almost all of these displays, and again on the section opposite where you see the Torios ceiling and the gallery space, almost all of these displays will be unglazed. You'll be able to see the objects, as it were, in the flesh. This is a really important part of the Storehouse through a very risk-managed approach, through development of new policy and new handling protocols, to try and make sure that we keep the physical and intellectual barriers as low and as far back as possible. So objects that are displayed around the collection hall and in the tributaries leading off from the collection hall will not be glazed unless there is a very, very good risk-assessed reason why it has to be glazed. We want to allow visitors up close and personal with these objects in a way that you don't see in most museum permanent collections. And again, I just want to take you then through a little route off the collection hall through this fly-through and just give a sense of this idea of opening up the back-of-house spaces to the public, because at Storehouse, all of these spaces will be visible. There won't really be a distinction between front of house and back of house. It will be a front of house experience created from the back of house world of the V&A. So again, starting here with the Torios ceiling, beautiful Spanish marquetry ceiling, the gallery which sits beneath it, and then going up onto one of these mezzanines where you see the framework which encases the Torios ceiling. You see some of the hat tin displays there with the crate typology. Then what we call the hat side displays as you walk through, more opportunities for display. A new gallery, which is just for us to display some of our biggest tapestries and old objects. There'll be viewing opportunities into conservation studios and a live feed. Again, one of our big, large objects, Frank Lloyd Wright's Kaufman office, in 170 pieces of plywood, which has not been on display for decades. Views for the public into the Clockworker Centre, which will be lifted and shifted from Blythe House to East London. And then, as you see, always very close to the collection hall, it's all part of a single public experience, which takes you around, and yeah, a kind of, maybe, we kind of hope we'll also be able to use it for dancing and events at night. But the idea is that very close to the collection hall, there's always this link between the spaces you don't normally get to see to promote this idea of full transparency of the V&A's work. And now I want to just say, sorry, I just had to squash a mosquito, sorry. I just want to say something quickly then. I've talked about the design and the construction of Storehouse. I want to then talk a bit about how we're going to animate Storehouse and bring it to life for the public. And to talk briefly through these three areas. So our interpretation approach, which will be different at Storehouse to what it is at the V&A in South Kensington, or indeed maybe other kind of museums. What we're doing to transform public access, and I've just got one example I want to give you of how we're looking to do that, a new model for doing that. And then, most importantly of all, looking at our learning and community engagement program and how we imagine that bringing Storehouse to life. So, interpreting the Storehouse, and we've really framed our interpretation strategy around these three categories. The first, I've talked a lot about this idea of bringing the working museum to the general public. All the bits you don't normally get to see unless you're on a guided tour or some sort of special access opportunity, we want to make a core part of the public experience, the self-guided experience. So bringing the working museum to life, our conservation practice, everything that goes into caring for an object, to assessing an object, its fragility, the way we go about creating exhibitions, inviting people into the process of making an exhibition, pin-ups, scratch displays, these sorts of ideas. Then why? Why do we have what we have in our collection? How did it come to be in the V&A collection? And we'll talk about contemporary collecting and some of our historic practice. We are looking not just to tell a V&A curatorial story of that collection, but to invite different voices in to tell the story of that collection and what it means today. Very much kind of emphasizing that the V&A collection is a public collection. It's just held in trust by the V&A, giving it across the idea that this is your collection for you to help us interpret. And then finally, how we use and deploy the collection as a creative source book for existing and emerging practitioners. How does that work, and how can we make that idea of inspiration for the designers and creators of tomorrow, how can we make that available for the young people who live and work in East London? And just an idea of how that might work. So I talked about the Hack 10 displays with that crate typology. We also have a version of that called the Hack Sides when you go off the corridors or the tributaries of the collection hall. And an example of how that will work is displaying the kind of work that's going on in the Cloth Workers Centre on any particular day. So the Cloth Workers Centre is used by designers and practitioners to come and mine the collection for ideas to inspire their next fashion collection or their piece of print work or whatever it might be. So we'll use those hack side displays to show the public what's happening in real time in the Cloth Workers Centre. What objects has somebody requested access to? Why have they requested access to them? What kind of outcomes are they looking for? And then to create a simple display of that in real time for the public to see. And this is the Cloth Workers gallery, as I say, transported over and refitted into the Storehouse. And the top right-hand side is the viewing gallery outside the Kaufman office. And then right at the far end, you can see this hacked side display right at the end, with visitors able to kind of see not just the hacked side display, but also into the Cloth Workers itself, and to get a real sense, a sort of dialogue with practitioners and researchers working in that space. Then the second thing is this question, the big question for Storehouse: how can we enable more people to engage with more of the V&A collection? How can we move away from the idea that the collections that aren't on display are the preserve or of those with special access because of their academic qualifications or because they are already an eminent designer or a recognized creative? How can we open it up? At Blythe House, at the moment, we get something like 5,000 or 6,000 visitors a year. At Storehouse, we want 250,000 visitors a year to come and access collections in that way. And this is one of the ways we're thinking about it. So we're looking at this new idea of ordering objects, where anyone visiting the V&A East Storehouse can, quote, order an object. We'll put the full collection up on a website with a booking portal, and they'll be able to say, okay, I'm coming to the V&A on Tuesday morning, and I would really like to see X, Y, or Z object. And underpinning this idea is this principle about public ownership, that everyone has the right to access the collections that are really held in trust on their behalf and for their use. And a presumption in favour of providing access, so not trying to hide behind the excuse that it's too dangerous to let people in if they're not qualified, to have a presumption in favour of trusting the public to value their collections in that way, and then to make access easy and really crucially meaningful access. So again, not always highly moderated, not peering through glass, but actually trying to bring visitors interacting with objects in the way that you might do if you're a curator or a museum professional. Obviously in a safe way, but to promote this idea of equity in terms of how we access collections. And so we have this organising principle, this statement of intent for public access to our collections. The V&A believes easy, safe, equitable and meaningful access to the V&A collections should be enabled for as many members of the public as possible. Access fosters greater appreciation and understanding of the collections, which in turn ensures their future relevance and investment in their care and preservation. The bigger the constituency of people who understand why we do what we do, how it can engage the public, how it can promote creativity, the better place we are to safeguard our collection in perpetuity. And so we're developing, as part of an object, these three ideas, these three products, sub-products. One, the experience, which will be based at the storehouse. This is for general visitors. This is for them. No particular motivation. It might just be peaked on the day. It might just be by browsing our website, and really focused in on our target audience for the whole of the storehouse, which are 16 to 24-year-old East Londoners, very diverse constituency, who are culturally engaged, very, very culturally aware, very, very smart, very talented, but don't currently see museums as something that has been designed with them in mind. Absolutely crucial priority group, walking into the museum and being able to order an interaction with an object on the day. Then the service, this is a bit more like a traditional idea of access. It's primarily focused around those who are practitioners, creative practitioners, but we're trying to level this up. So it's not just those who know how to get into the V&A, not just those who are familiar with working with the V&A because they're an established designer or an emerging designer. It could be somebody working on an A-level project, a school design project, just as easily, and we're going to make sure that we have equal access, that we don't always privilege the known designer, the named designer over a school child. And then finally, and we heard a bit about this at the previous panel, looking for ways to be more entrepreneurial with that product. What opportunities can we give, as it were, for a premium product, maybe out of hours, for kind of corporates or businesses to pay for access to the V&A collection when we don't need that time for the first two offerings, the experience or the service. So that's how we are imagining it. Then the third category of programming is obviously about audience, and this is where I want to finish my talk talking about audience engagement. We have really ambitious aspirations for Storehouse and for the V&A East Museum and Storehouse, because this is an audience which are highly sceptical about national museums in the UK, and they remain to be convinced that our intentions are genuine. So this is our priority group, 16 to 24-year-olds living in the 4 Olympic boroughs. We're hoping to attract 1.25 million visitors to the museum and storehouse, 1 million to the museum, 250,000 to the storehouse, and we want at least 25% of those visitors to be local residents from those boroughs. We want creatives across a whole range of disciplines. Our collections cover more or less every area of creative practice, and we need to ensure that all of those disciplines are reflected in the way we program, and we want it to feel local, primarily local, and a real sense of local ownership, but also national, that it will be a destination for national cultural tourists, and obviously international. This will be London's newest cultural district, and we want global projects brought together with that new East London partnership. So these are the 4 primary areas that we are organising our programme around, that we have developed in concert with our V&A East Youth Collective. So this is a group of young people who are not familiar with the V&A, or were not familiar with the V&A, that we have organised to really advise us and inform every aspect of what we do to make V&A East a reality. And this is what they have told us they need to see from V&A East if it's to resonate with them as our primary audience. So locally rooted, it needs to feel of East London. This is not something that, this is not a franchise. This is not a mini V&A. This has not been parachuted in from South Kensington. This has been very carefully conceived and designed to reflect a particular moment of geography and demographic in East London. But at the same time, these are ambitious young people. They're attuned to what's going on in the world around them, out in the UK and obviously globally. They want to feel that this is going to be a globally significant moment for them and for their local area. Crucially, opening up creative opportunity. This is at the heart of Storehouse. The idea that we are moving from a position where maybe our collections are most easy to access by those who know how it works, who know how to get in. Actually, this is opening up that creative opportunity and prioritising those who aren't necessarily, who is not necessarily historically been designed around as a museum. And then, as I've already talked about in the context of the interpretation strategy, polyphonic voices, lots of different perspectives, lots of different ways of reflecting diverse communities so that V&A East Storehouse, along with the rest of the V&A, is a more inclusive environment. And these are the three pillars then of the programme. So local communities in the creative sector, young people, and then schools. And I'm just going to talk briefly through those three pillars. So starting with community partnerships and participation, a very, very high emphasis on co-production and co-curation. Not doing this to communities, but doing this with communities. And that's been a big theme that I've heard here over the last 36 hours. Designing creative projects together, which are not determined by the V&A, but are determined in discussion with communities. And a good example is the annual Great Get Together event that happens in the Olympic Park. All of the partners, all of the kind of creative organisations in and around the Olympic Park get together to programme that site to connect with audiences across the 4 boroughs. And then increasingly for the East Bank partners, London College of Fashion, V&A, UCL, Sadler's Wells, and of course BBC Studios, to work together. This is why we have all come together to the Olympic Park, so that we can collaborate and do something always which is greater than just the sum of the individual parts. So a big emphasis on collective programming, collective commissioning in concert with the people of East London. A huge part of that was really reorganising the way we describe the lexicon we use to describe that programming. We have these 4 organising ways, some familiar to modern museological practice and some which are new. Co-creation, co-design, co-production, and co-curation. So from the storytelling through the process of making, the idea that this is about problem solving at its kind of essence, and then really focused on what makes the V&A distinctive, which is around the creative process. So not looking at each of these things in isolation, but to try and draw those 4 co's together into something which creates a virtuous circle of creative programming, which sits behind V&A East. Secondly, the Young People's Programme. The Youth Collective has been the most extraordinary privilege for the V&A to work on. We're now in our 3rd cohort of around 20 young people who live and work in East London that reflect the demographic of East London. And they are our eyes and ears. These are our primary advisors. These are our informal trustees as we create V&A East. We barely make a decision now on the V&A East project without consulting them first, about the appointment of a designer, about our supplier for the catering contract, about our brand work, about wayfinding, every single aspect. We consult in a meaningful way with the Youth Collective, and we take their advice on board as we make those decisions. And that's crucial. This is genuine collaboration and consultation. There's nothing tokenistic or formulaic about this. They are shaping V&A East in the way they want to see it. And then a whole other number of areas that we are working with young people, particularly around creative careers and creative pipeline, making sure that we are giving them those opportunities to find a life and a career in the creative sector, which is the fastest growing part of the creative, probably the only part that's growing of the UK economy right now is the creative kind of sector. This is a creative part of East London. This project will really be defined by how successful we are of introducing young people into creative careers. And then finally, schools. And we have this kind of challenge. This is This is the director of V&A East, Gus Casely-Hayford, and he is committed to visiting every single school and college in the 4 boroughs before V&A East Museum Storehouse opens in 2025. It's called Your Collection, and Gus goes around with 4 actual objects from the V&A collection in a suitcase, and he takes them into schools, into assemblies, into design classes. He opens this up and he uses them to explain the purpose of the V&A and what we're trying to do with V&A East, so that these people who are currently school kids, by the time they come out of school and are looking for colleges, universities, starting to make their life choices, front of mind, they will remember that class they did on V&A East with Gus, and hopefully that will lead to a long-standing relationship with V&A East Storehouse when we open. And this is Gus. This is a great picture of Gus in one of his classes. You can see the objects there being held by some of the college kids that he's brought in to show them what the V&A is all about. So I just want to finish with a few takeaways, a few of the sort of lessons that I've learned and I'm still learning about V&A East Storehouse, some of the highs, but also some of the lows, because we're still 2 years away. We were supposed to open pre-pandemic. We were supposed to open round about now, but actually we're going to be opening in May 25. So I just want to share some final thoughts with you before I close. The first is kind of scary for a museum, because museums, I tend to like to think they know everything about everything. And one of the amazing things about East Storehouse is that there is no manual for this project. We're trying to do something different. We're moving that incredible collection from Blythe House, where it's really closed off to the public in a real sense. And we're taking the opportunity to completely open it up. Now, normally, museums don't do that unless there are lots of display cases involved and barriers and security and so on. So there's no manual for this. That's a scary place for a museum to be, but it's also hugely kind of exciting, a great challenge for the institution. It's a very complex building because it's been designed as a public space, but as a secure space, as a storehouse space. And that complexity is one of the great opportunities, but one of the challenges for us as we try to operationalize it. As I said at the beginning, building a new museum during a pandemic and in a highly inflationary environment is not to be recommended. You probably will never have to confront this again. Please don't do it. It's very, very difficult. We started construction just before the pandemic, and in fact, we signed our second construction contract for Storehouse 2 weeks before the first lockdown in the UK. It was a nightmare. Operational planning. Again, new type of experience. How do you bring together the stuff that you're not supposed to see with this idea of a public experience? The whole thing is intertwined. You have to go a very long way at Storehouse before you finally hit a barrier, before you finally hit the door that you're not allowed to go through. So bringing those two things together is taking a huge amount of institutional thought, but it's a great process. It's a very fertile, creative kind of process. And it's forcing the organization to really embrace cultural change. And we're redesigning almost every aspect of the V&A's processes and way of doing things in order to make sure that we take the benefits of Storehouse right across the V&A family of sites. And it's absolutely critical to the success of V&A East that we change as an institution as a result. I've talked about audience engagement, co-creation, co-design, co-curation, co-production. Every aspect of the way we display and program Storehouse being done in collaboration. It is the ethos of V&A East to do it. Again, a bit of a departure from the way we've done things historically at the V&A, where we want to be all things to all people. We have a collection which represents creative practice from the last 5,000 years from every part of the world. It's a general audience, but with young V&A and with V&A East Museum and Storehouse, we're very, very focused, increasingly focused on a very specific audience which has been underserved by museums in the UK for decades and generations. So for young V&A, this is kids. This is a design museum designed for kids up to the age of 14. For the museum and Storehouse, this is for young people between the ages of 16 and 24 who live and work in East London. We've got to remain, that focus right to the day we open is critical. because otherwise we'll dilute the nature of the experience. We'll try and make it all things to all people, and we've got to remain really tightly focused on that audience. Keeping access meaningful. We've made a commitment to meaningful access, not token access, meaningful access to everyone, and that idea of equality and the opportunity that's really in the DNA of the V&N collection, providing that opportunity to the widest possible constituency. And that, of course, means that we have a different approach, have had to embrace a different approach to risk management, to transparency. We're letting people write in to peer at what we do and to share what we do. So we've had to revisit our object handling policy, the way we assess fragility of objects. What can be handled, what can't be handled, under what conditions might it be able to be handled by a member of the public. All of these things have had to be reassessed and new processes, new policies designed. But we can't think of everything, so we have to adapt and adopt a test and learn approach, an iterative approach, and to accept that it will not be perfect and we won't get it right on day one, and be prepared to go with that as an institution. And then finally, the amazing opportunity, because when we were told that we would leave Blythe House and we would have to move our entire collection, it was not a great moment for the organisation, not just because we had just opened the Clothworkers Centre, but because this is a big logistical headache, right? So what it's allowed us to do, though, is accelerate kind of years, even decades of museological practice at our institution. We've had to kind of think, we've had to do in 2 or 3 years what it might have taken us 10 or 20 to do. So our knowledge of our collection now, our access to it, the records we keep, the way it's catalogued, photography, barcoding, conservation, packing, storing of that collection have all accelerated as a result. And it means that when we get to the other side, our collection, our knowledge of our collection, the way we're able to share that knowledge with the public will have been utterly transformed. And it will be in the best order, kept in the best conditions it's been kept in many kind of decades. So they're my final...
Ladies and gentlemen, we will have a short break for 20 minutes. And again, we will be here for the next session, which in any case, we are starting at 4:30, just after the tea break. And that will be about the publishing and programming in museums. So I will request you all to be in time and be seated before 4:30. Now, please, you can relax. You can have time for refreshment or tea, whatever you like. Thank you very much for being with us till now. We hope to see you again in our next session about publishing and planning. Thank you.